Imagine everything your religion promised you, your land, your king, your temple, destroyed in a single generation, your holy city burned, your king executed, your people marched into exile. Now face the hardest question a believer can ask. Did God break his promise, or was he never strong enough to keep it? Ancient Israel faced exactly this crisis, and the answer they constructed shaped the entire Hebrew Bible. To understand the answer, we first need to understand the crisis. In 722 BCE, the Assyrian Empire conquered the northern kingdom of Israel and scattered its population. A century and a half later, in 587 BCE, Babylon destroyed Jerusalem, burned Solomon's temple to the ground, and marched the people of Judah into exile. The last Davidic king, Zedekiah, was executed. These events need to be understood through a specific lens. The Deuteronomistic historian, the scholar or school of scholars who compiled and edited the books of Deuteronomy through 2 Kings with a unified theological perspective, had to make sense of total national collapse. These weren't just military defeats. They struck at the very foundation of Israel's relationship with God. Here's why the crisis was so severe. God had made explicit promises. He told Abraham his descendants would possess the land forever. He told David his dynasty would endure eternally. Now both promises appeared shattered. This left Israelite theology trapped in an impossible fog. Option A, God is omnipotent but unfaithful. He had the power to save Israel but chose to break his promises. Option B, God is faithful but not omnipotent. He wanted to save his people but couldn't overcome Assyria and Babylon. Neither option is acceptable. Israelite monotheism insists God is both all-powerful and faithful. If either attribute fails, the entire theological system collapses. So the Deuteronomistic historian faced a problem that demanded a creative solution. To see why this was so devastating, we need to understand the two types of promises God had made. The first type, unconditional covenants. God's covenant with Abraham promised land, descendants, and blessing. The key word is I will, no conditions attached. God's covenant with David in 2 Samuel chapter 7 promised an eternal dynasty. Again, I will, regardless of human behavior. The second type, the conditional Mosaic covenant, established at Sinai. This one operates on if-then logic. If you obey my commandments, then I will bless you. If you disobey, then curses will follow. These two covenant traditions had coexisted for centuries, but the exile forced them into direct confrontation. The unconditional promises said forever. The conditional covenant said only if you obey. So how did the Deuteronomistic historians thread this needle? Through what we can call dialectic tension, holding two seemingly contradictory ideas as simultaneously true. The unconditional promises remain valid in the long run. The Abrahamic and the Davidic covenants are not cancelled, but the conditional Mosaic covenant permits severe punishment in the short term, including exile. The destruction of Jerusalem is therefore divine discipline, not divine abandonment. This distinction matters. Discipline presupposes that the relationship continues. A parent who punishes a child has not disowned the child. The Deuteronomistic historian made the same argument about God and Israel. The covenant is not broken, it is being enforced. God is not absent, God is actively present, wielding Assyria and Babylon as instruments of justified punishment. His power is demonstrated, not diminished, by the exile. We can see this argument laid out explicitly in one key chapter. 2 Kings chapter 17 is the Deuteronomistic historian's summary verdict on the fall of the northern kingdom. This is not a neutral historical account. It is a theological editorial, a historiosophy, a philosophy of history that finds moral meaning behind events. The chapter lists Israel's sins systematically. They worshipped other gods, they built high places, they set up sacred pillars and idols. Then comes the critical claim. God sent prophets again and again to warn them. Turn from your evil ways and keep my commandments. But the people refused to listen. They stiffened their necks. Punishment followed, not from divine caprice, but from accumulated deliberate human disobedience. But the fall of Judah posed an even sharper problem. The Davidic covenant specifically promised an eternal dynasty. How can an eternal dynasty end with Zedekiah's execution? The Deuteronomistic school found their answer in the original text of Nathan's prophecy in 2 Samuel chapter 7. God tells David about his future heir. When he commits iniquity, I will punish him with the rod of men. This line is decisive. Being God's chosen son includes being subject to discipline. The eternal promise is not nullified by punishment. It is suspended through justified correction. An unconditional promise does not mean no consequences ever. It means the promise endures through and beyond the consequences. This logic isn't confined to a single passage. Throughout 1st and 2nd Kings, the Deuteronomistic historian builds a recurring pattern. God sends a prophet. The prophet warns the king refuses to listen and continues in sin. Punishment follows. Then the cycle repeats with the next king. This pattern is not accidental. It is a systematic argument. Human free will, not divine failure, caused national catastrophe. Step back for a moment and consider what was accomplished here. The Deuteronomistic historian created a coherent philosophy of history that achieved four things simultaneously. First, it preserved monotheism. No rival god defeated Israel's God. Second, it maintained God's omnipotence. He controlled Assyria and Babylon as instruments of his will. Third, it maintained God's faithfulness, the covenant stand. Fourth, it placed moral agency squarely in human hands. This is one of the most sophisticated theological arguments produced anywhere in the ancient world. This framework became the lens through which the entire history of Israel was written and read. When you open Joshua, Judges, Samuel, or Kings, you are not reading neutral history. You are reading history filtered through this theological argument. Every king evaluated as doing evil in the sight of the Lord. Every prophetic warning ignored. These are editorial choices serving a deliberate thesis. Later, Jewish and Christian traditions inherited this framework for understanding suffering, punishment, and divine justice. The Deuteronomistic historian turned the worst disaster in Israelite history into a moral argument. God didn't fail. His people did. And that reframing from divine failure to human responsibility preserved a religion that might otherwise have died in Babylon.